So as we wait for people to join, I don't know, Karen, if you care to tell us the story behind the red color.
Story behind the red color. I've been asked this before, Raja.
I'm sure you have.
And it's been told actually in several versions. So one version of the story, choose what you like, is it's the Pentecost color in the Christian tradition. So it's the birth of the church. And so that's, one answer. So I always wear red because I am celebrating the birth of the church, or I just like it. Or if you only wear red and black back in the days pre-COVID and in a different kind of life, when you travel a lot and you only have red and black clothes, it's very easy to pack.
That's
so
right.
choose the version that you like.
That's all of the above.
Yeah.
That's right.
But it has become my signature color, that's for sure. I have a red Mini Cooper.
You do?
I do, yeah, 6-speed.
And that's a very cute car.
I think so. And also very practical, actually. I can get 3 grandkids in the back seat, 2 car seats and a booster seat, and it'll carry a kayak and a canoe on top. Not all of those things at the same time.
So Tara says that the red also stands out in the photo.
Oh, yeah. So Tara, and Karen Mock is answering
well,
too.
Karen Mock is another red person too.
I know.
Especially when she was running for a certain party associated with the
red color.
With the red color, yes.
Yeah, and Karen and Tara and I know each other well.
Okay, it's 5:32, and I think we will start the official program now. And with that, we want to, excuse me here. Okay. My name is Raja Kuri, and I welcome you all to today's webinar titled Interfaith Peacemaking, the Life and Times of Reverend Dr. Karen Hamilton. As we always do, we will start with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land and territories known and unknown. We respect Indigenous peoples as the original stewards of this land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. As settlers and immigrants, we recognize that we have an active role in reconciliation. I'd like to thank the Ottawa Forum on Israel-Palestine for sponsoring our Zoom platform today. And of course, our speaker and panelists, and all of you participants, with a special welcome to people tuning in from the United States, Latin America, and Europe. Our participants recently have been expanding into other parts of the world, and that's, of course, a very welcome thing. Also, a sort of brief reminder for those of you who haven't been to a Kuri conversation before, that these are dialogues and not debates. We're not looking for winners and losers. Rather, we're looking for insight and understanding. And as a result of that focus, we most of the time we end without any casualties. Now, the format for today is, as you know, we're here for an hour. I will be introducing our guests, and then we will have a conversation. There are no presentations. Nobody's doing any presentations. We're just going to have a conversation, Jeff and I, with Karen, about her career, life, and with focus on the multi-faith peacemaking work that she's been engaged in Israel-Palestine. This session is being recorded. I'd like to start by introducing Reverend Dr. Karen Hamilton. Karen has served for 15 years as the General Secretary of the Canadian Council of Churches, which is the broadest ecumenical council in the world, with 25 member denominations representing 85 of the Christians in Canada.
85% of the Christians in Canada.
85% of the Christians in Canada. And that includes its operating division, Project Plowshares. Karen is the founding chair of the Canadian Interfaith Conversation and our Holy Society Conference, and has received national awards for ecumenical and interfaith leadership. She has had 3 books published, including the award-winning The Acceptable Year of the Lord, Preaching the Old Testament with Faith, Finesse, and Fervor. Her latest interfaith social justice book will be published in the spring of 2023, and we will be asking Karen about that book. Karen has traveled extensively in the Middle East and Africa, including Afghanistan, Syria, and Andalusia, and has led groundbreaking 3 faith study tours to Israel-Palestine. She has a leading role in a unique 3 faith study course based in Jerusalem. Her 9 languages at various levels of proficiency include English, French, Italian, Hebrew, Arabic, German, Latin, Greek, and Ojibwe. She has served the World Federalist Movement for over 20 years as national chair and as a member of the international executive. She also serves on the boards of Project Rosanna Canada and Camp Schoolcog, and is an advisor to the Love My Neighborhood project, which promotes global vaccine equity. Lastly, in 2018, Dr. Hamilton co-chaired the Parliament of the World's Religion Toronto Board, and since 2016, she has had the privilege of supporting Syrian refugees in Canada. So Karen is our main speaker tonight. I'm very pleased to have with me my friend and colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Wilkinson, who will be a discussant with us. Jeffrey is an American Jew living in Canada. He works actively in the Jewish community, specifically around Israel-Palestine issues. He frequently speaks at synagogues and Jewish community organizations on trauma and its relationship to the debate around the conflict in the diaspora. Jeff holds a master's degree and a doctorate in education, focusing primarily on the psychological impacts of trauma related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As a longtime educator and facilitator, Jeff has worked in the field of human rights and social justice for 3 decades. He was the equity officer for a large Canadian school board and is a widely recognized trainer of social justice and human rights education and teacher education programs across Ontario. He currently consults with several organizations in a variety of areas, including navigating challenging intercultural and interreligious conversations. Well, welcome both, and thanks very much for being with us today. I'd like to start, Karen, by asking you some questions about your fascinating life and career. You're a woman of faith, an ordained United Church minister, an author, an interfaith leader, an academic, a world traveler. You speak 9 languages. You are what I would call a leader with consequence. So my question to you is, what has been the driver for you in this very busy and full and successful career?
The short answer, which is the complete answer, is God. I can expand on that, but I hear the voice of God in people, in events, in experiences. I see the face of God in people, and I'm curious. So I want to know more. I always want to know more. And one thing, of course, leads to another, which is kind of the story of the languages. One thing leads to another. But I want to know more. I'm interested in so many things. And I want to know, sort of on a more profound level, what sustains people? How are people sustained in their lives? How are they sustained in times of difficulty? And how do we talk to one another in a world that is full of joy, but is also full of much challenge? So all of that drives me. It helps to be kind of restless too. My son, I have 3 grown children, and my son most wisely points out that I have about a 20-minute attention span, which is not exactly true, but he says you're up from your desk about every 20 minutes. So there's always more to learn and more to experience and more people to meet.
9 languages?
9 languages, yeah, well, as I said, one thing leads to another. That's in a sense a more linear explanation. So I'm born knowing English. I took French in school. My kids are all bilingual. At the Canadian Council of Churches, you have to be bilingual. Canada is a bilingual country, so English, French, we have to be bilingual. So my doctorate is in Old Testament. So Ani Medaberi Ivrit, I speak Hebrew. So then you sponsor Syrian refugees, and of course Hebrew, and we'll maybe talk about this a bit more later. Hebrew and Arabic are very related languages. So then Ana Tekalem Alura Al Arabia, then you speak Arabic. In my doctoral work, I had to have Greek, Latin, and German. And then the most recent, though, and it relates very much to your land acknowledgement, and it relates to my book, actually. So we are all, in very uncertain ways, trying to understand what reconciliation looks like with First Nations sisters and brothers that have been in this land, that are in this land. So what does that look like? Well, I spoke to Mark MacDonald, who is the first First Nations Indigenous Archbishop in Canada. And I said, so what are some ways I could do that? People are doing all kinds of different things. He said, learn one of the languages. And you did the land acknowledgement, Raja? Well, in terms of where I live, I said, what language? I know there are so many. And he said, in terms of where you live, you learn the language of the place. So it would be Ojibwe, which also gives you Anishinaabe. So,
was it hard?
Well, I'm still learning. Yes. Are they all hard? Yes. Am I restless and persistent? Also, yes. But yeah, it's hard. I mean, Buzu, Misawi means like hello, and that's all for now in Ojibwe.
Your answer to my first question was God, and I'm a lapsed Christian myself. Grew up in a very Christian, Greek Orthodox environment, as a matter of fact, in Lebanon. As I became an adult, I kind of started leaving gradually behind me all the rituals and the beliefs involved. And so when you say to me, you see God in people's faces, and it's God that's, I can try to imagine what that is, but I don't know. Can you help me
a bit more? Oh, it's a hard thing to explain, Raja, and you are not alone, which is actually a line from the United Church of Canada creed, but I feel God as a force pushing me. Other people might say that something else, they're pushed, in different ways, by different ways. But I feel God pushing me. I see people as holy. I see the holiness in people, and which is not to say that there's not all kinds of bad behavior. And we have this evening in the context of the war in Ukraine, and that's all incredibly real. But I feel it, I hear it, I see it in scripture. I mean, that's why my doctorate is in Old Testament or Tanakh. I hear it in the stories of scripture. I see, I feel, I understand, I hear how the stories of scripture relate to life as we live it in the world, as I live it in my immediate context. And I here's maybe, it's no easier to understand, but here's a different way to hear it. So I'm a Protestant. Protestants are people of the word. Big thing in Protestantism was to have scripture in our own local language. That was a big thing. People died for that. Those who translated the Bible got burned at the stake in the beginning. But this is a big deal for Protestants. And it is for me. But, and this might lead us to the Canadian Council of Churches questions, I worshipped I prayed with so many Christian denominations for whom English is not the liturgical language. And I wasn't sure what that was going to be like, frankly, to worship only in Armenian or Greek or Ukrainian. I've worshiped with the Ukrainian Orthodox often. They are so heavy on my heart right now. And I could still feel God's presence. I could feel the Holy Spirit in those places and it affecting me. It's another way to think about it.
I'm jealous. I envy you for having that kind of, spiritual strength and fulfillment.
Doesn't mean there aren't lots of uncertainties though, Raja. There are lots of challenges and things I am not sure about and questions. And I have had lots of questions for God along the way, and I do every day.
Right.
Now, let's talk books. As I mentioned in your bio, you've already had 3 books published. You've got one slated for next year, and the working title of your next book is For Just a Time as This, Faith as a Protest.
Working title, the publisher gets to decide.
The publisher will have to decide, but this is your working title. And for the record, I'm very much in favor of this working title.
Yeah, I'll give you the person to email.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Let's do that. This book is different from the 3 before it. Tell us about it, what it's about, what made you want to do it.
Well, this sort of relates to your question before. I was no longer with the Canadian Council of Churches. I left after 15 years, loving every minute of it. Well, not every, there were a few, minutes of administration that were perhaps not quite my favorite, but loving it generally. But it seemed after 15 years, it was time for me to do something different. And I thought it was good for the Canadian Council of Churches to experience different leadership. 15 years is a long time. So then what do you do with your life? See, back to the God question, what is God calling you to? The work with refugees, absolutely. The languages, absolutely. Well, maybe I should write something else. So what I did though was something quite different. And I talked to the publisher and said, where's the gap? What has not been written in Canada? It's a Canadian publisher. What has not been written in Canada? What's the book that's missing from the face scene? It's a religious publisher. And the answer was an interfaith social justice book. They exist in the Christian tradition. They may exist in other faith traditions, but a broad interfaith social justice book doesn't exist. So one of the funny things that you have to do, I'm sorry, Novalis, if you're listening, one of the things you have to do when you put in your book proposal is explain why you are the perfect person to write the book. And it feels like a very pretentious thing to try to even answer. But when I sat there with the page in front of me, I went, I am the person to write this book. So it is an interfaith social justice book. There are 10 chapters. And I'm the person because I have a passion for it, but also because it's like the Ghostbusters thing. I knew who to call. Like, if you're going to have a chapter on genocide, I know who to talk to interview for that, or racism, or First Nations realities. I already mentioned Archbishop Mark MacDonald. Rings of Peace. I knew who to call. And the other thing, now, some of the people listening are people who've contributed to the chapters. So, take this story, very much, in good humor. My publisher said to me, but you've got all these people to agree to be interviewed for the book. What are you promising them? I said, I'm promising them nothing. I accept that. That's not really true. That's the flip answer. The real answer, though, is I know these people and I know the passion of their hearts. And I know the ways they're all people of faith. And I know how to some limited extent, how God is speaking to them and through them. And I know that the things I was interviewing them about really, really matter to them. And those stories need to be told. So they're hard stories. How do you talk about anti-Semitism? How do you talk about racism, human trafficking, Indigenous realities, the Rings of Peace, genocide, as I mentioned. I interviewed the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, climate crisis, refugees. Did I mention that? Refugees, and human rights and religious freedom. So I interview these people who have been working passionately with all of their faith, with all of their heart, with all their words, with all their actions. And those are the chapters. Now, it sounds like, and this is really important to say, it sounds like a really depressing and discouraging book. And on a level, how do you talk about genocide without being, absolutely riven to your core? But here's where, and then in my language, God always has surprises. One of the questions I asked every person I interviewed was, do you see hope in this issue? And I didn't expect most of them to say yes. I expected most to say racism is horrendous and it continues and we're not making a dent. Indigenous realities, we're not making a dent. It's still terrible. Genocide, still terrible. Every single one of them, Raja, answered that they saw hope. Every single one of them, which I'm just in awe over that. The other thing is that I also asked every single one where individuals can make a difference, because I know that we all get overwhelmed by huge issues. I worked a lot with the Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals. We all get overwhelmed with these huge issues. How can I make a difference in the international human trafficking reality? But every single one of the interviewees had a way, concrete, fairly simple, that individuals can make a difference. So it actually is a book of hope.
Well, yeah, I mean, without hope, we can't really go anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's what I admire about people who have faith, because faith gives them hope and helps them to find hope. Before I turn it over to Jeff, sort of one last question, and following Jeff's conversation, we will open the door for audience participation and questions. Now, the Canadian Council of Churches is, as I described earlier, it's a huge organization. The official mission, as it says on the website, is that the CCC, quote, responds to Christ's call for unity and peace, seeks Christ's truth with affection for diversity, and acts in love through prayer, dialogue, and witness to the gospel. It's an exaggeration if I said that means nothing to me. It means something, but what does it really mean? And like, what was it about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And people ask me that all the time. And sometimes in a less kind way than you have phrased it, because people would say, well, if the churches all are working in unity, why do you even have a job? What's the point of your job if they're already working in unity? Like shouldn't as some would say to me, are all the churches united in their belief in Jesus Christ? So why is the Canadian Council of Churches, even necessary? Why do you have a job? So that was a kinder way to phrase it, Raja. So one place to start, though, is to say, it sounds huge. More than 85% of the Christians in Canada represented in the council. Absolutely. But remember, Canada, population-wise, is small. Numerically, we are small. So that on the world scene, when the Canadian Council of Churches is engaging with church councils in other places in the world, we actually have quite a very high profile, actually, but numerically, budget-wise, staff-wise, the council is tiny. At our peak days, there were 4 staff FTE, full-time equivalent, 4, and on a budget that is less than most congregations have. But so that's important to know. But the other really important to know thing, what gives Canadian Council of Churches some prominence, some clout on a global scene, is that unique to most, not all, councils in the world, the Roman Catholics are full members. That is not the case in most of the world. And half the Christians in Canada are Roman Catholic, and another half, like half of those, are Francophone. So hence why we all speak French at that council. But there are also some of the larger evangelical denominations belong to the council. So the kind of thing that you read in the New York Times or read in papers about polarization between what I would never want to call, but some would call sort of left and right parts of Christianity, that is far less of a reality in Canada. So what that means is, to then answer your question in more detail, Canadian Council of Churches worked and works in a consensus model. Nothing gets stated, work doesn't get done unless all the denominations agree on it. They may all work on it. They may agree on a group of the denominations working on it. But in particularly in terms of an official statement, there has to be full consensus. And it's not as hard as one thinks, because we are united. Everybody said, well, it's impossible. How will you get 25, there's actually 26 now, member denominations to agree on something? Well, because the roots of the faith make it much easier than one would think, and because we know each other. So is there poverty? There's an example of the issue, an issue the council works on. Is there agreement amongst Christians around the dire reality of poverty and some things that could be done about it? Yes. Homelessness, healthcare, refugees. The Canadian Council of Churches, the Amnesty International, and the Canadian Council for Refugees opposes to the Supreme Court the Canada Safe Third Agreement. And if somebody wants me to talk about that later in the questions, I will. Basically, we don't think the United States is a safe country for refugees to be sent back to. The council does not. Palliative care, biotechnology, interfaith relations, prayer, yes, prayer for the week of prayer for Christian unity, yes, as part of the council's work. Intercultural ministry and leadership, racism. These are all things that Christians work together on, and of course work with people of other faith on as well. So my job was to, and there was a pastoral relationship, the pastoral dynamic to my job too. So I was there in the Coptic Orthodox Cathedral when we prayed for those who had been beheaded by ISIS in Northern Africa. I was one of the speakers. I mean, the weight of that will never leave me, being asked to pray in that kind of context. So there was a pastoral role in which, really, I have to put myself, I had to at the time, past tense, and I still do in other situations, but in that situation, I had to put myself in the hands of God, because how else am I going to have an awareness, a sense exactly of what we say in that kind of context? So I'll stop there. There's much more that we could say about the Canadian Council of Church. Look up the website. Just Google it, people.
I can spend the next 2 hours asking you questions about your experience there. It must be fascinating, but I will do that on my own private time.
I would be delighted.
Some other day. Someone has raised their hand, and we're not taking verbal questions, folks. I do ask that you use the Q&A to put in your questions or comments, and we will be looking at them shortly and asking Jeff and Karen to respond. But for now, what took you to Israel-Palestine? And Jeff will be asking you these kinds of questions.
Cool. So, excuse me, thank you very much. So Karen, what I actually would like to do is kind of segue. Can you hear me okay, Raja?
Yeah, well, I hear you. I don't know Raja, but I can hear you.
Okay,
yes.
I'm going to kind of segue from the conversation about your book and the Canadian Council of Churches to Israel-Palestine by talking a little bit about morality and the church's role. So you were probably familiar with a special book by Jonathan Glover called Humanity. Are you familiar?
I am familiar with thousands of books, as my children would say, thousands.
Okay, but not that one. So I'm not going to go into a long story about it. The short part is he looks at the 20th century from a crisis of moral identity lens and how we descended away from our moral fabric through World War I and II and things like Serbia and Rwanda. And I just wanted to ask you, as we move towards talking about the study course that you help lead, how do you see the role of faith in supporting and buttressing our moral identity? And do you see that that faith has a particular role in helping us live up to our values?
Well, I'm intrigued. I haven't read the book. I don't know the book, but I'm intrigued by your initial point that he sees morality slipping away after the First World War. What about the Crusades would be my first.
Sure, that's kind of a longer point. The main point I wanted to make is that he talks about the erosion of moral identity, and it's of course happened long before World War I.
Yeah.
My question to you is, how do you see the role of faith in supporting our values, our moral our moral and ethical duty to the world?
Okay, well, there's so many places to go because, what are our values? There's a question, right there. And everything is going to kind of spin back to my 15 years at the Canadian Council of Churches, because you've heard me say already, I mean, there was huge diversity: Ethiopian Orthodox, Salvation Army. Some would say, there weren't that many sort of moral values shared. And yet I have already told you that there were a tremendous number of moral values shared. So erosion of moral values, I don't even know how to answer that, because I think that's always been a challenge. I don't think that's a new thing. However, haven't read the book. What I would say, and this is what I would say, and I would say it on an ecumenical, which is Christians together a level, but I would say it on an interfaith level. We talk to each other. We talk to each other, and we have the courage to challenge each other, and we have the humility to listen to each other. And so that when the Canadian, to use that example again, I promised I would, when the Canadian Council of Churches would, and still does, arrive at a statement on something, which is, they're all of the statements are deeply moral. It's been arrived at by 25, 26 now member denominations in consultation with each other and listening to each other and praying together. And that's the same reality in an interfaith conversation. We have to listen to each other, and we have to be open to challenge, and we have to also approach the conversation with humility, but then also with creativity and persistence, and not get, which was my point, in a way around the book, that takes me back to the book. It would be very easy to just simply be discouraged and think that there's nowhere to go and nothing that can be done. And goodness knows how many of the things that we do now are going to, prove wrong. Is not something, it's not something that we know. But we put all those things together and we try.
I got it. So Karen, as we move into the Israel-Palestine conversation, could you talk a little bit about what led you to take your interfaith experience into Israel-Palestine and why you do it?
Yeah.
What's your hope and dream for it? And just kind of tell us, the audience, a little bit about the study course and how it happened and why it's there.
Yes. So it's a decade now from its origins. And I happen to know, because I can see the comments pop up, that Rav Baruch Friedman Cole is also listening in. And so he and I, and Imam Abdul Haipatau, and Father Damien McPherson, Roman Catholic priest, knew each other. And we did things together. And we were in, an interfaith reality. And we knew the importance of interfaith. And we talked about Israel and Palestine and the realities and the complexities. And everyone is, deeply aware, as much as we can be in the West. And that's important to say. Of the pain and the complexity of the land. So what could we do? What could we do? Well, I know that not everyone would agree with me in this, but in North America, we probably can't solve it for the people of the land. That's not our place, I would say, in on all kinds of levels, but also not realistic. So what could we do? What could we do? Well, we were very aware that when different faith traditions, and I'll speak mostly for Christians here, go to the land, they see a very narrow picture. And for any Christians, listening, I say that very deliberately. It's a very narrow view of what is seen. And we thought we could do it differently. And that we could take, and that's what has happened, Jews, Christians, and Muslims together, and could see the land, the places, the people, the politics, the reality, the hospitality, from each other's perspective, and from the perspective of a wide variety of people, who are in the land. And so 10 years ago, and Rav Baruch and I are still doing it with great, now we are just so honored to be hosted by St. George's College, the Anglican College, just north of the Damascus Gate of the Old City. And so we work in collaboration with them, and they offer fabulous leadership and admin support, which is so amazing. And Judy Sillig, who I've also seen is on this call, has just been an amazing support and enabled us to get there. The first two courses. Thank you, Judy. And now St. George's College does that administrative role. And so we take a wide variety of people of all different faith traditions to see a wide variety of places and to hear a wide variety of voices. And we are as challenging as we can be, not by expecting people to somehow see it the way we see it, or to come to, nice, tidy conclusions. But we want people to see the messiness, and we want people to see the beauty and to be exposed to it all. So for those of you on the call sharing perspectives, St. George's College Jerusalem, actually, you have to put in when you Google it, because there are many St. George's Colleges. St. George's College Jerusalem, February 2023. You are feel free to register now.
Cool. So I wanted to ask you, it kind of piggybacks on a little bit on the moral question. Do you see your work in Israel-Palestine as reparative or healing for either the people who go or for the people who are there? And if so, how? And how do you handle the moral and ethical complexities of healing within, a trauma-driven place where, any attention to one side is seen as a grievance from the other?
Well, to start with, I've also seen comments about Ukraine popping up on the screen. To start with, I'm going to answer your question with another question. When you ask about...
it's a very Jewish thing to do, Karen.
Well, remember my doctor's in Tanakh. When we talk about morality in any kind of a way, how are we as Canadians right now coping with the fact that we are welcoming, as we should, Ukrainian refugees to this country, and we still can't get the Afghanis who helped Canadian forces in Afghanistan here? So our entire lives, everything about our lives is full of those kinds of moral issues that we all need to be working about and talking about all the time. So that's really important to say. So is it reparative? I don't know, in a way. Are people that come on the course and study with us at St. George's College, are they changed forever? I think most would say yes. Do they come back to Canada with a very different perspective? One of the things, and this is Rav Baruch, this was yours. One of the things that we would say is, if you don't come back from this experience more confused than you left, we feel that we have personally failed you. So then we spend, the rest of our lives and our experiences trying to work that out. Is it healing for the people that we meet there? I mean, you'd have to ask them. We get feedback that the interfaith bodies and the speakers that we engage with feel supported by the fact that we really want to hear them, and we really want to hear their honesty, and we really want to hear them tell us not what they think we want to hear, but what they really want heard. So people there say that's helpful. We're very visible. You're walking down any part of the land, which is, as you know, very divided in ways that in the West we don't really quite understand until you go there. I mean, how can the souk, in the old city be so divided into Jewish and Muslim components when it's all sort of under one structure? But we're very visible. So we have people in kippot and people in hijab walking together with arms linked. down the streets. So people see us. We've been written up in the papers there. So we're also a witness. We're up on the Haram. We're at the Western Wall in various different kinds of religious garb. It's visible. Is that healing? Is that challenging? Is it confusing? Probably all of those things.
Got it. Thank you very much for that. That was an awesome answer. So what I'm going to do is piggyback on some of the questions that we're getting and some of my own questions, which is if you could talk a little bit more, dig a little deeper into the complexities of when, you know, a pro-Palestinian statement is made, it is perceived by some as anti-Semitic. When a a peace and security for Israelis or Jews, or, you know, even a comment about the terrible attack a few days ago, it is seen as a lack of support for Palestinians. So I wondered if you could talk both from your CCC role and your personal role in how you deal with making statements that different groups are going to react to as a lack of care for them. I wonder if you could talk about that.
So first, important to say off the top that the CCC has no Middle East policy.
Right.
That's very, very important to say. And there are all kinds of complex reasons for that. And one that might shock people that I didn't find out for many years is, well, it won't actually, Jeffrey, it won't shock you. The amount of expertise that one wants to bring to any statement on any issue is tremendous. Around the Middle East, probably even more tremendous. And it is, in my experience, now it's been 4.5 years since I was at the CCC, so I only speak for past experience, but in my experience, it was only the bigger denominations that had the resources and the capacity and the staffing and the ability to commit the time that was needed in order to have a Middle East statement. So that's important. So the CCC does not have one. Statements are really difficult, and there's lots of controversy around how you decide what to issue them about. And there's some, really clear things, like as you said, the latest anti-Semitic attacks and the latest attacks on mosques, masjids that simply require us all to speak out, or to go back to my book, to act. That's the Rings of Peace chapter. Do you speak? Yes, you speak. Do you call people and offer your compassion and support and ask what they need? Yes. Do you go there, and are you physically present, supporting sisters and brothers of another faith tradition at particularly vulnerable times of liturgy as a visible witness? Yes, absolutely. Are statements going to be issued that people are not happy with? Absolutely. If you go back again 4.5 years, the statements we issued at Canadian Council of Churches, all the denominations of Canadian Council of Churches would agree.
Right.
But when you make them public, there's always somebody who, from their perspective, feels it doesn't say the right thing, and maybe they're right. There are certain things around Israeli and Palestinian realities that are important to say. You talk about peace and security, you talk about justice, you talk about the land, the holiness, the sacredness of the land to many peoples. Those things are really important, but there's always going to be challenge, and probably so there should be, because that's how we learn from each other.
So
excuse me, Jeff, I'd like to start taking some of these.
I was going to follow up with a couple of questions from the chat. Did you want to do that, Raja?
I'd like to follow up on that last question of yours.
Certainly.
In the sense that, a number of people had spoken about the same kind of, how could you go visit Palestine when children are held in Israeli prisons? How can you go visit settlements? Do you go visit settlements? Is that okay? You know, the top subject of Israel-Palestine, as we all know, is often highly polarized and sensationalized by some people. And I guess people are looking for answers. How can we talk about this when people are intransigent, ideologically driven? When all this injustice is happening, how can interfaith be any factor in this?
It's a good question, and I can't answer for the people asking that question. What I believe is it's important to see and hear as much as possible and talk to as many people as possible, and to put those stories, narratives that they trust us with back to back as much as possible, and to get as wide a diversity of experience as possible. So do we go to a Palestinian refugee camp? Yes, absolutely. And we listen. And we listen very carefully and ask questions, of course. Do we go to a settlement? Also, yes. And listen and ask questions. Is it easy to critique both of those? Visits, I don't even like the word visit. And that's a problem for me. And that's a problem for us all, and it should be a problem for us all, because also, how do you listen to people's stories without feeling a bit voyeuristic? I mean, obviously, everybody that we meet with, everybody that speaks, everybody that we talk to is of course invited and, you know, an honored guest, and sharing their story as they want to tell it. But still, so here's one example. Some years ago, in the Palestinian refugee camp, and the pain and the sorrow of that place, and, you know, somebody was taking an incredible number of pictures of people's lives there, and you know, I had to be the one that said no, I don't think that's right. So, and the course is 8 days, 9 days. So, you know, you can argue that it's not nearly enough. But for those who go and who come back having seen a lot more, and challenged by the moral questions and wanting to know more, that's also what happens, which is very real. People come back wanting to know more and more and more, and being exposed to more and more and more. And does that make a difference to the world? I think it does.
So Karen, if we could, I'm just going to piggyback Raja on a couple of the questions that are in the group. So one specific question, you said that CCC doesn't have a Middle East policy. So a participant asked, do you speak up for the rights? Does CCC speak up for the rights of Palestinians? So okay. Is the answer to that question no?
The answer to that question is very simple and simpler, and it will disappoint the person asking the question. Yeah. I have not been there for 4.5 years. That is not my question to answer. In
your time when you were there?
In our time when I was there, that was not one of the issues but this has to be said very carefully. That was not one of the issues that the whole CCC spoke to. Now, there are member denominations, and I could name many of them, but again, that's not really my place to. There were member denominations who were doing that all the time. But you remember what I said about they were member denominations that were bigger, that were able to have, you know, people on the ground and people with great expertise. But I say that, and I repeat it again, because it has been my experience, and we all know how painful and how challenging anything around the Middle East is. It's my experience that every time I have said, when I was there, I'm now 4.5 years, not at the Canadian Council of Churches, but when I was there and I said the Canadian Council of Churches has no Middle East policy, stories would come out in the press the next day about the Canadian Council of Churches Middle East policy, of which I had just said there wasn't one.
Right.
So I understand the passion around that. But no, in the time I was there, the council as council. However, also understand that one of the members of the Canadian Council of Churches is a Greek Orthodox. Are the Greek Orthodox in the land? Yes, they are. Another member of the Canadian Council of Churches is the Armenian Orthodox. Are the Armenian Orthodox, do they have one of the quarters of Old Jerusalem? Yes, they do. The Syrian Orthodox we would connect with. So that's another way to understand that question, is that the CCC is made up of denominations who are very much indigenous in the land and working in the land. The Franciscans are the ones who have the Franciscans, Roman Catholics, and they have the guardianship of most of the Christian holy sites, and they're Roman Catholic. So, it's a more complicated question, and so those denominations are speaking all the time.
Right. I think that's a thorough answer. So, Karen, let's just dialogue for a second here. There is a question, and I have a similar question. And we won't talk about CCC, but more you and your recent book. Do you, first of all, do you see a relationship between the treatment of Indigenous people in Canada and the Palestinian experience? And if so, do we have a co-duty, if we're speaking about Aboriginal issues, to also speak about Palestinian issues?
Okay, I'm going to start not where you want me to start, which is to say I should have mentioned.
I know where I want you to start.
I should have mentioned the Ethiopian Orthodox. When I was talking about the Greek Orthodox, the Roman Catholics, and the Armenians, the Ethiopian Orthodox have a monastery and have from the very first days of Christianity on the roof of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So again, another part of the Canadian Council of Churches that is so grounded in the land. That's a question that I would want to think about much more. What I know is this, that the Jewish community and the Indigenous communities of Canada have worked together and supported each other very much. And there are some incredible stories of the cleaning by Indigenous stonemasons, who are a great strand of expertise, of the anti-Semitic defacement of Jewish gravestones. That's real. Do I know that the Indigenous realities of Canada and Palestinians feel that there is much in common, and that there is an understanding of suffering shared by both? Yes, I know that is also true, but I am not Indigenous, and I am not Palestinian, and I am not Jewish. So those are questions, I think, that that really aren't, that really are better answered by people who are Indigenous and Palestinian and Jewish.
So I'm going to frame it within the space that we're in, okay? And I think the space of our audience, and you and I think we both, probably have some personal feelings about this. What I'm asking about is not what Aboriginals should feel or Palestinians should feel. I'm saying, as Canadians, as many of us are active in Indigenous rights, all kinds of Indigenous rights conversations, from clean water to lots of other issues, I personally feel a duty to be equally active for Palestinian rights because of their indigeneity that they share. And so I wanted to talk about that from sort of a moral, an ethical framework. And I think our audience would be interested in your response to that.
Yeah, what I would do is I want to listen. So I would, rather than saying what I should or should not do, let's get some Palestinian Indigenous people together and ask that question and listen to the answers, and really listen to the answers. Okay. That is, I would want to hear what they have to say. I don't even like using that term they, but I want to hear more.
Okay, this brings us to near the end of our conversation today. A couple of announcements. On April 7, Koori Conversations, along with the Ottawa Forum in Israel-Palestine, will be having a conversation with Lara Friedman. who is the president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace in Washington, D.C. We will be talking about how America has reacted to the various, apartheid reports from human rights organizations about Israel, and American Palestinians, American Jews, the American establishment, civil society, to see how these now 3 reports might have made a difference or not in public opinion. The other session coming up is on May 25th, and it will be with Khalid Al-Gindi, who is the director of the Palestine program at the Middle East Institute, also in Washington, D.C. And we will be talking about sort of what next for Palestinian leadership. Gandhi once was asked, what do you think about Western civilization? He said, I think it will be a good idea. Here, we think it will be a good idea to have some Palestinian leadership that is befitting of Palestinians and their just cause. And we will be discussing what might happen in the future with Khalid Al-Gindi, and that's on May 25. So please hold these 2 dates. And I want to thank you all for being with us today. I thank Karen very much for making the time to be with us, especially knowing that you would much rather be with your grandchildren. And I know that because I know you personally.
Quite that way, but they're adorable.
Yeah. And Jeff, thanks very much for helping us today with this discussion. And with this, wish you all a pleasant evening and hope to see you on April 7th. Goodbye for now.